Good morning. Are female artists overlooked? Are they undervalued in the secondary markets, in the primary markets? Is this a good time to buy art by female artists? We'll talk about this and a little bit more this week on Behind the Gavel with Jason. I'm Jason Roski, the owner of the KC Auction Company here in Kansas City, and I really appreciate you watching this week. We love to put this show together and come up with interesting topics, and I think this is a really fascinating one. There have been a couple of studies come out. I was going to share this on my page real quick and go ahead and post that so that my friends can see that I'm doing another video. But so female artists, there's been a couple of studies come out recently and many studies done over the last 40 or 50 years in regards to female women's artists and participation in creating art, but also being in the executive and administrative levels in the art world, whether that's in museums or galleries, exhibitions, programming, whatever it is. And the numbers are interesting. They're getting better, but there's definitely still room for improvement in a lot of areas. Basically, about over half of the students in Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts programs are women, over half of the students, and yet only about 36%, I want to make sure I get that number right, 30% of artists represented in galleries at any given moment are female. That number's gotten better, obviously, but still, it's a huge disparity. If half of the students graduating today are female, and there's only 30% representation in galleries, that's obviously there's a big gap there. There's room for growth in the gallery world. What kind of started this conversation in my head was I heard about a study called "Is Gender in the Eye of the Beholder: Identifying Cultural Attitudes with Art Auction Prices." And this is done by Renee Adams, Roman Kraussel, Marco Navone, and Patrick Verwamarin. Sorry about that. Hey, honey, thanks for watching. How you doing, Stace? Their reports, their study showed that there is a 47.6% discount based on gender, and that was based on 1.5 million transactions. They used Blue Art Index as the source material. Blue Art Index is a website that you can go to, you subscribe to, and it congregates art auction results from thousands of auction houses around the world. They looked at transactions from 1970 to 2013 from 45 countries to come up with that 47.6% gender discount. And so what they looked at, and the study is 68 pages long. I obviously can't go into all of it, but they looked at, certain artists are male or female just because you have records for them. Others, they use different search engines. They use different methodologies to determine is it a male or a female artist. Some they couldn't determine, they removed from the study. And so they came up with a 47.6% gender discount, which is a fascinating number, but it's also a bit misleading. They took into account all transactions. And going back to 1970, in 1970, so I also found another study, Art and Gender Market Bias or Selection Bias, written by Laurie Cameron, William Getzman, and Milad Navar. And they found something that I thought that was really interesting. And they studied students who had come through the Yale School of Art and had graduated, and they tracked their sales post-school. And they came up with a much different analysis than the first study, but a lot of the things they found were very similar. In their report, they talk about it between 2010 and 2015, 92% of the top lots sold by Christie's, Sotheby's, and Phillips, again, based on Blue Art Index information. Hey, Chad, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please post them here, share it with your friends. But they found that 92% of the top lots sold were by men between 2010 and 2015. Only 8% were sold by women. In 2015, 99 of the top 100 sales at auction were by male artists. And so in this art and gender study, they had over 4,000 graduates from Yale Art Institute. I'm going to talk more about this study than the first one that started this odyssey for me. And so they looked at a lot of different factors, and they actually found that art bought by Yale graduate students during the 80s and 90s If you had bought female artists in the 80s and 90s, your return is better than if you bought male artists from the same school. Obviously, there's a lot of factors in that, but they found that there was a better return from that. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but they had some really fascinating numbers. And I'm kind of a numbers geek, so please bear with me. If it's boring for you, I apologize. But if you find it interesting, share it with your friends. Until 1983, there was a male domination of the arts programs in Yale. Previous to that, it had historically been a 3-to-1 ratio of 3 males to 1 female. In the 1950s and 60s, it got up to a 6-to-1 male to female ratio of art students. It started to change in the 70s and 80s, and by 1983 is the first time Yale had parity in their student body. They had 50% men and 50% women. 1983, and that number stayed static pretty well. I'm sure there's fluctuations here and there, but generally speaking, it's 50-50 since then. One of the things that they found out, which is really fascinating, even since 1983, and I've got notes here, male students were written about post-school, even before and after school, during school and after school, and they got this information from the Google Books corpus, where you can search for terminology usage over time, that male artists were written about 2 to 3 times as much as female artists. So when they did the Google search on Joan artist and the Google search on John artist, John on average had 2 to 3 times as many mentions in magazines and books and periodicals, wherever the source materials were, than Joan did. Before 1983, it was between 3 and 14 times as much student to student, not because there was more students, but for every student, there was that much more mention of a male's art and his work than a female. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons for that. Prior to 1983 and prior to the 70s, really, the supposition is there's a higher bar for female artists to even get into the school. So their work was higher quality to begin with, but there weren't as many in the school. Men have dominated the art space until just recently, and so men gravitate towards men. And in fact, one of the questions I have and flaws I see in the Gender in the Eye Beholder study is that they use SurveyMonkey to interview a lot of people, and they said they actually gave a male's name, these Marco's name, as I'm Marco, I'm asking these questions. And I know in my mind, I have no idea who this person is, but I saw a male in an art studio. I saw a male figure of authority in a museum, in a gallery, in an auction house, just because the name they use is Marco. If they had used Maria, I would have seen it differently in my mind's eye, and I'd have responded differently. Their study found that on average, people assume that an piece of art is done by a male over a female. They did blind tests. They took 10 pieces of art, 5 by male artists, 5 by female artists, by good artists, but not extremely well-known artists. And they found that over 60% of people, over 60% of the time, the person answering the question said that the painting was by a male artist, even though it was a 50-50 split. And they found it was even worse in men, and even worse still in men who were affluent and who had visited galleries and auctions and museums regularly. Part of that is because personally, I just assume things are done by a man until I'm told differently or found out differently. And I think that's just part of our, I think that's part of the human psychology, is that we assume things are by people like us unless we know specifically that it's not. And so our initial instinct is to go that way, especially when a male is interacting with us. And so again, I think there's a flaw in their study in that one term, but still it's telling that we assume that art is created by male artists, even when it's not. And so that's just a really fascinating thing. What other things that were common? So the Yale study found that there was 525 out of the possible 4,400 some odd artists that had graduated from Yale. They found records of their works in blue, and there was over 10,900 works that sold in 36 countries. And 10% of the graduates had sold at least one piece. So that was interesting. but the male to female ratio was there was a lot more male art on the secondary market than female art. And of the 9 Yale graduates who had sold a piece for over $1 million, only one was a female. And only one male was born prior to 1900. That was Frederick Remington. So that's a pretty high bar. You're comparing, Frederick Remington to one female. That was interesting. And so I think is the female art market, is there space there for a good investment today? If you're looking at artwork as an investment, and I'm not an investment professional, but I study the markets pretty well, I think there is, and for many reasons, and the numbers are kind of bearing that out. As women become more and more affluent, as women become more and more a part of the art world in the management level, the administrative level, the curatorial levels, you'll see them gravitate more towards female artists. Same thing holds true for people of color. As galleries and museums and such explore and pay attention to huge markets that are there and bring in diverse staff and employees, it's going to bring up those people around them. And so I think we're seeing it already, and we will continue to see more and more interest placed in artwork by women, by female artists, because there's more of it available. Obviously, since 1983, the male to female ratio of artists is about 50-50. As I think the conversation around income equality becomes more and more pronounced and more as a part of our everyday life. My children have been talking about this since they were born. They heard this. That was never a thing when I was a kid. So it's a generational thing. So I think the children, coming up today, won't have nearly the identification, the identifiers that we do, and those subtle biases that we all have as we get older because of our history in art bringing. Good morning, Mercedes. How are you doing this week? Thanks for watching. We're talking about the female artists in the secondary art market, and it's kind of a fascinating topic to me. I think there's a lot of room to explore there, a lot of room for growth in the market for people looking at buying. If you're buying contemporary art, maybe not gravitate towards women solely because you like them, because they're women, but it's something to pay attention to. The market is definitely showing over the last 20 or 30 years that there's obviously absolutely more female participation in the arts markets, in creating of art, in selling of art. And I think as people become more aware of what's going on and more aware of that difference in value, that I think people are going to start exploring that, especially as females, as women become more and more and more successful, become more, CEO level, C-suite level buyers. They're just going to tend to naturally gravitate towards artwork by women they grew up with. And so that's kind of where it all starts. If 50 years ago, the people who were in charge of the money were old white guys. They bought artwork from the other white guys that they knew from childhood. And that's how those markets got established. And the same things are happening now. And we're seeing it in the study, the art and gender market bias or selection bias. Female works created in the 80s and 90s has done better from Yale artists' secondary market than the male artists have, even with a lot of obstacles and hurdles to come over. So I think looking at it, I believe that there's going to be more attention paid to female artists. I know here in Kansas City, the Blue Gallery and the Lady Volkus Gallery are both run by women. And I know they have a lot of female artists that they represent statically and also in special showings. And so I think there's going to be more and more and more attention paid to artwork by female artists. And I think there's a much lower hurdle to the market for artists now than there's ever been before, with Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and other social media entities to put your artwork out there to people who are going to be most interested in it. You don't need to count on those galleries. You don't need to count on those traditional gatekeepers. You can find those buyers even if you're not going through a big gallery, having to go through those blockers, those censors, those jumping those hurdles and going over those barriers. Is a signed piece really worth more? Absolutely, because once you get removed from the original artist. So if I buy a piece of artwork from an artist, I know where it came from. I know the artist. I know when I bought it. I know what I paid for it. I know all of those things. I know the story they told me if I got that far with it, if I knew the artist and all. Remove that from the equation. Go out 10, 20, 30 years. If it's not signed, there's no way to go back and find out who created it. So, I mean, there are definitely artists who have a very unique and identifiable style, and you can, on better known artists, you can absolutely make attributions, but an attribution is never as good as a "this is by" kind of a situation, just because there's always that doubt. The art forgery market is huge. We were approached last year to sell Basquiat oil, and it fooled several people. But we found out at the end that it was not a legitimate piece of art. It was a legitimate piece of art. It was a painting, but it was not by Basquiat. And it's a 7-figure painting. But they had done an incredible job of taking, they'd signed it. It was signed and everything. But if you don't have, you need that documentation and that proof of lineage, especially on higher value pieces, so people feel really confident in the secondary market. So yeah, absolutely, a signed piece really is worth more. Now you can have a signed piece that's still a forgery, but having the signature definitely helps. As nothing, if nothing more than just an identifier, you can say it was painted by this artist at this time. If everything else is being equal, if you know that it's a piece by that artist and it's signed, it's going to be worth more than a piece by that artist that is not signed, because once people get separated from the original source, there's just no way for them to know. And so absolutely, and that brings in the regionality topic. It brings in the time frame aspect. We see paintings painted today that are supposed to look like they're 80 years old. And so you really have to know that. And the signature definitely helps with that. So I see I just heard the church bells. It's already noon. My goodness, this 15 minutes has gone by quick. But just to kind of recap, and if you have any more questions, please post them here. Drop us a direct message. Send us an email. According to one study, there's a 47.6% gender discount based upon 1.5 million transactions from 1970 to 2013. I believe that number is absolutely skewed, because early numbers before 1980, even before 1990, the quantity of male results, the quantity of male artwork to be purchased just so overshadowed any female work on the market. There was so few, Frida Kahlo and George O'Keeffe and a few others, but realistically, the numbers were so massive. The tidal wave of male artists over female artists was just so massive. There was no way to be equitable there. But even so, there's still, on the market as a whole, there's more money spent on male artists. But that's because there's more artwork available made by men historically and in the secondary market than there is made by women. So I think that definitely plays a role. As we see in this other study from Edwards 2014, referencing the art and gender market bias or selection bias, portfolios created in the 80s and 90s, the female works did better than the male works between then and now, and I think that's going to continue. Sterling silver stamp with the artist name is also worth more. Yeah, again, Mercedes, having that identification, knowing who made it, definitely makes a difference. You can have a great piece of silver that's just marked sterling, that there's no way to attribute to somebody, but the same piece with W.S. William Spratling or whatever the Randall or Kahlo or whoever your topic is, whoever your source is always going to be worth more than a piece not known. And I guess that's going to kind of wrap it up. I think my thoughts are that it's going to, the female works by female artists, going to become more prevalent in the marketplace, and because of that, there's going to be more attention paid to them, and because of that, there's going to be more value in the secondary market. And I think it's all going to start playing even more so on itself. And again, as women become more and more used to and more accepted in and more expected to be in the executive levels of both the arts worlds and in the corporate world, where you're making more money, you have more money to spend, they're going to gravitate towards buying works by female artists. So I think there's still an opportunity there. Same thing for artists of color. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch that over the next 10, 15, 30 years and see if I'm proven correct or not. I'm going to, obviously these videos stay around forever, so it'll be interesting to see if in 10 or 15 years when somebody does another study, if I can go back to 2018 and say, look at this video I did there when I had more hair and it wasn't as gray, that I said the same thing 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it's just going to be fascinating to watch that. But again, thank you all so much for watching. It's supposed to be a beautiful weekend here in Kansas City. Raining tomorrow, but the temperatures are fall-like, which we're all excited about here, and things like that. We have an auction going online today of marbles. Interesting. Again, I'd love to have these things signed, because marbles, after a while, when you have hundreds of them, all start to look similar, and it's really a challenge to say this is by this company and this is by that company when you have so many variations. Oh, thanks, Mercedes. Thank you for watching, and you have a good week as well. We have a next consignment auction coming up. We have some great art for that. We're really excited about it. If you're looking to sell your artwork or consign it, give us a call, 816-283-3633. You can go to our website, kcauctioncompany.com, for more information. Look at other videos either here on YouTube, on Facebook, or on YouTube to see more of what we talk about on a regular basis. You can always send us a message here, post a message here in the video, drop us a private message here, or drop us an email at info@kcauctioncompany.com, and company is spelled out. Again, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. And I'm drawing a blank. I had that. I have a topic, but I can't remember right now. But anyway, watch the Facebook page. We do this every week. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.